All right, so this is really just an update video, and it's just a quick update relating to the two figures I got from LooseCollectors, so Satanus and Chaotica. And if you saw my previous review of both of these, Satanus came with a broken left arm, and Chaotica's face was a bit misprinted. So they both definitely had some QC issues, and I'm really just making this video as an update, and also as just kind of what I'm just a little bit of advice in terms of like what I'd like to see from LooseCollectors. And I'm not arrogant enough to say that, you know, do everything I say. I might be wrong on some points. These are all largely just my personal opinions, just what I want to see in a figure from LooseCollectors. Now, I will say that LooseCollectors does seem to be the type of company that listens to criticism, so that's definitely respectable. And if you follow them on Instagram and YouTube, I highly suggest you do, because they're very transparent with updates they do, things like that. So if you're into these figures, definitely, you know, follow them. And that's not me. Like, I don't work for them, nothing. I genuinely like the figures they make. That's it. So this video is not going to be a full-fledged review. I already reviewed these figures, so they deserve the scores they got as far as I'm concerned. And this is just a quick update in terms of what happened since then. So, okay. And, you know, these high heel figures, kind of a challenge getting them to stand. But let's start with just Satanus. Yeah, so let's start with her first. So her arm was snapped at the bicep, and heating, nothing worked. I tried heating her multiple times because I really didn't want to stress the plastic. And unfortunately, that joint was just, it was ready to go. Like there was no saving it. Let's take this off so it's easier to see. Okay. So, yeah, her biceps snapped because the plastic there was just very weak. It was just ready to give out. And they did send me a replacement arm. And as you can see, no problems whatsoever. So definitely good on them for that. And it took about a month, a little less than a month, maybe a bit more than a month, I'm not sure, but around that time frame, which is normal. Actually, if you'd ever ordered replacements from like China, things like that, it might even take multiple months, maybe 2, even 3. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm perfectly okay with that. And yeah, that was really your only issue. So this arm is smooth as butter, had no issues whatsoever. And yeah, definitely a good figure. Like, you know, it's definitely a nice looking figure. Just unfortunately, it had that breakage. So other than that, I'm pleased. So I will put their email in the description below. So if you ever have a break on one of your figures, they're very quick to respond. So I will leave that in the description. You could always reach out to them on Instagram, everything also. They're very good on communication from what I've seen. So Satanus out of the way, I'm good with her now. Now, something that's definitely a bit more subjective was my kind of review of Chaotica. And if you saw my review, I just think she's very subpar compared to the figures they've put out in the past in terms of just overall look. I don't like her kind of like her face for the most part was just very drab, just kind of dull looking. There's just some, like, it's just kind of like the faithfulness to the art that's on the box. I don't think it's there. Like, it doesn't look like the character on the box. So that was probably one of my biggest criticisms of this figure. No breakages on this one, nothing like that. Very tight thigh swivels, though. I did really have to kind of warm those to get them moving. So other than that, no huge issues there. So they did send me a replacement head, and if you're actually taking a look, this is the replacement head. I already kind of swapped it out, and I have the old head here for comparison. And I think the mouth is definitely a lot better on this one. So definitely more symmetrical. The eyebrows are definitely painted in nicer. Like, if you could see that the actual eyebrow sculpting wasn't even painted on. If you could see that on the old one. So much nicer on the new one. Very nice. Let's see. Other than that, I think it's pretty much, there's no huge differences that I'm seeing. I think it's just a very boring face that they decided to go with for this one. And if you saw my previous video, they gave an alternate hair piece with it, and it just doesn't match this face at all. So definitely happy they sent me a replacement face here, because she does look tons better with just a mouth that's symmetrical. That does tons to just for the overall look of the figure. But in general, I am noticing it might be a little hard to pick up on camera, but this face does seem a little sharper in terms of just overall detail. But other than that, yeah, this figure is pretty much the same criticisms that I went over in the other review also. So, first of all, LooseCollectors, I think they're great just for, just how easy it was to get the replacements sent. That's one. And just some bits of advice, or just some kind of like wants that I'd like to see in future releases. It's really just improved articulation. And these kind of joints, now, just so everyone's aware, they did announce that they're going to have some major improvements in their figures. You could check their Instagram where they kind of highlight some of their new articulation schemes, and it looks like they really are listening to the criticisms that they've received recently. So I will kind of just point out some of the changes that I saw in their Instagram post. So they are going to have a lower diaphragm, a lower torso joint, and that's definitely a welcome addition. They're going to use import style joints, and what that means is if you ever own figure arts, things like that, that's going to replace these kind of like more Marvel Legends-esque joints. And I think the import style joints are vastly superior. They just tend to not loosen up as much over time, and they just look better also. So why that's going to be nice is you're going to get less of these ugly kind of choppy looking double bends that just look just honestly just terrible. So that's definitely a welcome addition. They did say they're going to have a multi-directional wrist joint. Not sure what that means, but I'm guessing it's probably going to be like a ball swivel on what you'd see on like the import style figures. So right now it's just a swivel. That's it on a peg, which honestly I'm okay with that. But ball swivels, just be careful how you implement them, because they have their own problems too, especially on figures that are more delicate. And what I mean is sometimes they'll just straight up break. So I'm okay with these straight pegs, because a lot of times on more delicate figures, if the ball joint there is crappy, it's going to break. So that's what it is. It is what it is. If it's well made, sure, not a huge deal. They're going to use better joints for the knees. So same thing, they're going to use import style joints for the knees. And if I did see one of their female figures, recent one, they're not going to do this kind of single mold here, where they're going to kind of actually mold the button as like part of the thigh, so it'll move with it. So that's much better for articulation, instead of having like this bricked off like plate over here that just gets you no backwards movement. Now, I'm curious to see how they're going to implement that, because there is always a trade-off between, and it's not really a trade-off, it's just how well can you implement the articulation without sacrificing the look. Don't sacrifice the sculpt. You don't need to. That's a nonsensical myth that more articulation breaks up sculpt. That's a cop-out from lazy designers. Just to toss a name out there, Roman Key Cowl, they do an excellent, excellent job of meshing insane articulation with a very organic, natural look. And not saying to, copy them, but I'm saying it's possible. And, it's not something that's mutually exclusive. So that's just a cop-out as far as I'm concerned. So if you're going to have articulation points, new articulation points, make sure they're actually functional. So don't just make like a cut down here that's just a tiny wiggle. Use a nice substantial ball joint in here to get really good movement in that lower torso. So that's one. If you're going to have new articulation points, make them very functional. Don't just put it in there just to have them wiggle a bit and say that's new articulation. That's not going to slice it. I think there's going to be some obstacles along the way, but looks like they're constantly improving. So definitely encourage them for that. And from what I'm seeing, yeah, and in terms, and one of my biggest wants from this company would be, yeah, way better articulation joints for the ankle in general. So right now it's just on a hinge, which, you know, it works, and you do have an ankle rocker, but the problem is it's very hard to get her feet flat in certain poses, and without having that more kind of import style joint, which would just be kind of like a double peg ball swivel. So there'd be a peg going inside her calf, and there'd be another one that just goes in at an angle. And just very important, because so many companies screw this up. So loose collectors, if you are watching this, if you're going to do an ankle joint like that, uh, go in at an angle. Don't just go straight down. And I've seen so many McFarlane, I'll just say, they do this. They have that kind of joint, but then they just peg straight down vertically into the foot, which makes zero sense. So you get no ankle rocker doing that. So that's not what an ankle rocker is. So an ankle rocker has to go in at an angle, and it looks like this one does. But again, that hinge is just kind of cutting off articulation that could be there. So you don't have that ability to, you know, swivel horizontally like this. You lose that with just a kind of basic hinge like what we have here. So that's a very welcome addition. Let's see what else. Yeah, and in general, I think what loose collectors could do right now is really just keep refining their craft. And I'm not an expert in sculpting; they're way better at it, obviously. But you know, make your figures look more organic with the articulation. They look good. It's definitely I think it might be a challenge kind of implementing this new scheme, but I think it looks great from what I've seen on Instagram. So, and you know, competition's fierce. Just keep refining the figures like you are, and I think these figures could be excellent. In terms of just head movement, it's always a challenge, but I'd say one thing that could be worked on is just kind of mobility in terms of like the hair sculpt, because yeah, a lot of these characters have very kind of dramatic designs for their hair, and I get it. It's hard to kind of implement that, but I think for what it's worth, Satanus, when they designed her, they did a really good job. She has pretty good head movement, so they did the sculpt on her hair in a way that doesn't get in the way too much, but her collars here do. So I'd say always pay attention to that. There's creative ways to get around that, but don't ever sacrifice head movement. It's just unpleasant. Now, one thing I'd also want to mention is price. So I think these figures are pretty expensive, right? So I mean, like, and definitely too expensive. And I think people have been very clear on that. So prices in the 112 market are insane as it is, and not as an insult, but these figures, they, for where they are right now, as in like what's in front of me, these are not worth $70-$80. They're just not. Okay, so let's just be realistic there. And I think Loose Collectors did take that message, because I did see a pretty significant price drop on some of their new releases, that Kung Fu line they've been working on. I'm curious to see if the price cuts will extend to these kind of more traditional lady figures, which is, I'm guessing, you know, kind of like their main bread and butter. But I think they're going in the right direction. So they're definitely listening. They're not like the import figures who just keep going up and up, but prices do need to come down. So something else very significant that needs to be discussed is alternate faces. And this kind of goes in with the price here, because, you know, at this price point, you'd expect at least two, or like, you know, just three alternate faces that you could kind of swap out on these characters. You know, and as it is right now, like, you can't really do anything with just a single faceplate, or even a head, because, you know, these are just the way they're set up. It's just going to be an alternate head or whatever. At least at the very minimum, I think there should be some kind of like battle oriented alternate head. This face looks great in my opinion for Satanus, but if you ever have her fighting with someone, she's just going to be having this neutral face. It doesn't really make much sense. So you need some kind of screaming or angry face on all the characters here, which are all comic book characters. So they're going to be fighting. They're not just going to have a neutral expression. That's very disappointing. At this price, that's essentially a must. Like, you're not getting value if you don't have that. In my early reviews of these figures, I kind of I glossed over that because the company was so new. But, you know, if you want to keep up in this market, you need alternate heads. Another one that I'd like to kind of bring up is the cape situation. So And I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. These capes are terrible. Like it's just like it feels like hardened candy or something. Like just dried up old taffy. It's just so starchy, stiff. You can't do anything with it. So, and the big debate is, do you use fabric or do you just use a flexible, ultra flexible plastic, which works? If you've seen the Sasuke figure from Figuarts, honestly, he's probably one of the best examples of where they used plastic correctly. That doesn't get in the way of articulation. But I think the trend is it would probably be a good idea to have use actual soft material, which I'm okay with. I'm just against using too much soft materials where it's not needed, like for pants and things. That's a bit silly, I think. It's just more of a risk of ripping. But for capes, I think they're great. So, the whole bendy wire thing, that's all great. But this is just too in the way. It makes it very hard for the figures to stand up. And the competition seems to be going the direction of fabric capes. I highly suggest using that for future releases because this is just not going to cut it. On the early releases, sure, but get rid of these crappy capes because they suck. So I've heard people compare these to Marvel Legends, and I could see where they're coming from. But for me, I don't think Marvel Legends would do these designs in a million years. So Hasbro is a bunch of wusses, and they'll never make female characters that look like this because it doesn't even need to be said. It's just for prudish reasons, for simple reasons, they won't make female characters look like this dynamic, or this kind of bold, if you want to say. So I fully support LooseCollectors. The fact that they're improving their articulation so dramatically. If you compare the change in a Marvel Legends figures for the years they've been out to what they're putting out today, there's very little change. And yeah, they have changed, but how long did it take? So LooseCollectors has been out for a fraction of a time, and I think they've improved dramatically. So am I interested in seeing more from this company? 100% yes. They're actually one of my favorites just because I'm into the design. They make lots of kind of more creepier Halloween themed figures, and I'm all into that. So some final parting words that I'd have is just watch the joint tolerances. Don't ever let your figures break. That makes you look absolutely terrible. Don't screw around with joint tolerances. That's so important. Make sure everything is silky smooth. And yeah, power to them for the improved articulation. That's definitely a welcome feature. So if you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comments. This is really just a quick update, and I'm happy now because they look better and they function better in Satanus's case now than when I got them. So yeah, thanks for watching and take care.